The Not So Perfect Pair by starcollectorsilas. Before we begin, heavy warnings for explicit self-harm in this chapter. I usually place the warnings in the description or comments, but this has to be emphasized. Please take care of yourself and click off or skip to chapter 15 if it's potentially triggering. Stay safe, everyone. Chapter 14. It was stuffy and far too bright. There was noise everywhere, and the solid wall against his back was the only thing convincing Dazai not to make a break for the door. That and the vaguely threatening hand on his shoulder. "And it was your son who did this?" an excited med student asked, pointing at a few different diagrams depicting various surgical procedures in basic terms. "Indeed, he is talented. He has an eye for these things," Mori said, the praise sounding genuine to all ears but Dazai's. What Dazai heard was, "He should be working harder. Not a scrap of this is talent. He needs to study more." But Mori's smile was the proudest Dazai had ever seen it, and despite knowing there was no truth behind it, he straightened up, smiling politely, resenting the surge of happiness at the look of pride. There were murmurs of appreciation as the drawings were poured over, hygiene and stitching hand-drawn with labeled instructions. An older doctor, one who seemed to know Mori, nodded approvingly. "Your boy is good for his age. Still has a long way to go before he gets into a med school, though," he said with a laugh, and Mori nodded in agreement. "Of course. He's working hard, though, aren't you, Osamu?" Mori said, and the hand on his shoulder tightened its grip slightly. Dazai had wilted at the previous comment, but he straightened up again, nodding and smiling. "I'm dedicated. I'd like to think I'm good at what I know, and am getting better at the stuff I don't." There were some laughs and the group moved on with the conversation, letting Dazai sit forgotten at Mori's side. Good for his age. That one's going to stick. Unsurprisingly, being home alone all weekend when you normally had an on-call entertainment service was kinda boring. And anxiety-inducing. But the lack of distraction from the ever-pressing issue of his soulmate, especially with the long lines up the length of his arms, was infuriating. Chuya tried everything. YouTube, games, writing. Hell, he went on a run. While he had barely spent a second not busying himself with something, he still managed to find the brain space to worry, both about his soulmate and about Dazai. It was far too warm to be wearing trousers today, and finding shorts that covered the lines down his thighs had been agonizing, but he had managed to find a pair that covered them comfortably while still being relatively short. And now, he was sitting in the kitchen waiting for water to boil for dinner, and he had nothing in his hands. All he can do is think. He can see his sisters out in the garden, sitting and reading on a blanket on the grass. His parents were out, and Koyo couldn't cook if her life depended on it, so he was asked to make dinner. Eager for another distraction, he had leapt at the chance, but now the water was nowhere near boiling, and his phone was on charge next to his bed upstairs. He feels miserable, which is depressing. The sun is bright and it's warm, he's been productive, and he is objectively doing alright. But he hasn't spoken to Dazai for days. His last interactions with Dazai were uncomfortable and upsetting, which isn't either of their faults, but he is unbelievably worried. "One of my friends lives on Dazai Street. There's a little rumor that his dad hates him. She caught it through a window, apparently. Maybe that's the reason he dresses like some kind of neglected orphan, because his dad hates him and his mom left him." He hears the words clear in his brain, over and over. And Dazai is currently God knows where, and alone with his dad. Though, aside from Shirase's words, he has no reason to believe that Dazai's dad would do something like that. But what Shirase said, combined with that stupid flinch he had noticed on Tuesday? Dazai had flinched a second time as well, when he had been shouting at him. He still can't remember what he had said exactly. He just remembers going on about how they didn't like each other. Interesting, given the moment he had thought he liked Dazai. Maybe I want to be an overprotective boyfriend. Why did Dazai sound so serious when he said that? Wow, that's a rather harsh rejection, Chuya. They don't like each other. But Dazai had said it in his stupid, half-serious, half-joking tone. The one where he wants to say something, but he doesn't want to be told no or criticized. He used it in class a lot when answering questions, like he's prepared to shout about how he got the answer wrong on purpose if it wasn't right. It was always right. Dazai was a genius. Maybe he had just been uncomfortable with the situation. As far as he knows, Dazai has never dated anyone. Kissed people, sure, but he's never had a serious relationship. And as far as Chuya knew, he'd never kissed a guy, only girls. Though Dazai commonly made comments or jokes about the attractiveness of male actors or singers. How much of that was jokes? He sighed, pulling himself out of that train of thought as the water neared the boil, and he grabbed the bag of pasta, grabbing a knife and using it to slice open the bag. He'd be killed if he did that in his home economics class. His teacher would probably stab him with the knife he used just to tell him not to do it again. But he wasn't in the classroom right now. He poured the pasta into the pot, guessing the amount he'd need. He couldn't be bothered measuring, and honestly, he was starving, so he'd eat any leftovers. He grabbed a fork to push the pasta around the pot, another thing he'd be killed for in home economics. As the pasta was all underwater, he put the fork down and put a clip on the bag of pasta, putting it away in the cupboard. When he went to take a seat again, his eyes caught on the knife on the counter again. He needed to put it away. He grabbed it, but hesitated as the sharp edge caught in the light. He knew how sharp it was. It had cut through the pasta bag easily. He was drawn back to his soulmate, the blue lines covering his body, wherever his soulmate must find easy to hide. He swallowed, looking down at the knife. Surely it must feel somewhat good if someone could do it so much. Cathartic, maybe? Just a release of emotion. He hesitated again, but with a glance around the kitchen to ensure it was still empty, he pulled up his sleeve, seeing the pretty blue staining his skin. It would genuinely be gorgeous, various shades of light blue scattered across his skin, if it wasn't for the knowledge of why they were there. Putting the knife down, he ran a finger along his skin. It was weird. He expected a different texture, a raised patch, or just something different, but it was all the same. Just the feeling of his skin, more sensitive than usual due to being covered so much. With a shaky hand, he picked the knife up again, pressing it against one of the deep blue lines in the middle of his forearm. The tip of the knife barely covered half of it. The motion was probably more of a push and pull than just push. He wasn't sure what he had been expecting. When he had considered doing this about a year ago, when someone he had trusted decided to tell everyone that he was gay, he had told Dazai. He hadn't meant to. It had been an accident. A simple, "Do you have something sharp I can borrow?" that had resulted in Dazai pressing for more information and pulling the truth out of him. Dazai had convinced him to tell his parents, and he never even got the chance to try it. Surprisingly, he hadn't even thought about it since the bullying stopped. At least until his birthday. Now he had a knife to his arm. But if he felt so distraught over everything that had been happening, surely this would help take his mind off of it. Making his mind up, he found a clear patch of skin, pressed the knife down, and took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3. He pulled the knife with a pained gasp. Chuya! His sister screamed behind him. Chuya jumped in surprise, dropping the knife and yanking his sleeve down as he whirled around to see Koyo standing with wide eyes in the kitchen doorway. It's not what it seems, I swear. Chuya managed to get out after a few times, but Koyo ignored him. She stormed into the room, snatched the knife and threw it into the sink, and when she next met Chuya's eyes, hers were filled with tears. What the fuck was that then? Show me your arm. What did you do? She said accusingly, narrowing her eyes as she stood in front of him with her arms crossed. Chuya's brain was swimming from the sting in his arm and the sudden wave of sickness that had come with the single cut, and he struggled for an answer. It's nothing. It was stupid and I won't do it again, he said, his voice breaking. He was shaking and he felt like his legs might give out underneath him. Chuya, let me see, Koyo snapped. Chuya flinched, not intending to. He knew his sister was just scared. Of course she would be. He shouldn't have done that. Not here, at least. It doesn't matter. I don't think it was that deep, Chuya protested, shielding his arm protectively. No, it does matter, Chuya. No matter how deep it was, you still put a knife to your skin, Koyo yelled, but before Chuya could respond, he hissed in pain, a slight pain suddenly radiating through his thigh. Of all times for his soulmate to do this. Actually, it was the first time his soulmate had hurt himself while Chuya was awake since that time in English. Koyo took a step back, and both of their eyes widened at the new blue lines appearing rapidly after one another, lower on Chuya's thighs than he'd ever seen. They were silent for a second, until Koyo spoke, her voice wavering. Now you really need to explain. If you don't tell me now, I'll tell Mom and Dad and have them ask you. She threatened needlessly, the words already beginning to spill from Chuya's mouth. It's my soulmate. He's been hurting himself for God knows how long, and it's everywhere, and he's still doing it. And I don't know why, but I felt so bad. I figured if he's been doing it for so long and so much, it must at least feel good, but it really doesn't, and it actually really hurts. He blurted out, somehow making it through the entire explanation without bursting into tears. Koyo blinked rapidly, nodding as she took it in. Okay, show me your arm, please, she said, sounding calmer, albeit barely. Chuya nodded in response, pulling his sleeve up and wincing as it brushed over the stinging cut, the blood smearing slightly. Koyo looked like she might be sick, but she just grabbed a clean cloth from a nearby shelf and pressed it against Chuya's arm. Koyo's hand seemed to be shaking more than his own, and Chuya felt bad, watching the blood stain the cloth. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Chuya whispered, his voice breaking as he spoke. Koyo shook her head, face down, but Chuya saw a tear fall down her cheek. No, don't apologize. It's not your fault. It was stupid, yes, but it's okay. Just don't do it again. Don't do it again, she said, her voice wavering. Chuya nodded, sniffling, but refusing to cry. I won't. I promise I won't do it again. I hated it anyway. He paused and went quiet for a moment until Koyo removed the cloth. It wasn't really that deep, but would unfortunately still probably leave a scar. Koyo opened the cupboard under the sink to fish out the first aid kit, and Chuya cleared his throat. Please don't tell Mom and Dad, he said quietly, his tone pleading. Koyo froze, in the process of finding a suitable plaster. She took a deep and slow breath as she stood up, peeling off the backing as she came over. I won't, she agreed reluctantly. But you will tell them yourself. She compromised, angling the plaster and then smoothing it over the brown skin like it had never happened. Chuya felt sick at the idea of telling them. He remembered their concern from the year before. They had been so worried and upset for him. He didn't want to do that to them again. But if he didn't agree, Koyo would tell anyway. I will, he said after a second. Koyo just nodded, stepping back and wiping her eyes. If you do that again, I'll find a way to make it so that pizza and video games as a combination are banned, she threatened, trying to show her concern without scaring Chuya into not doing it again, or not telling anyone if he did. Chuya laughed awkwardly and pulled his sleeve back down again. Then what would I do when Dazai comes over? He responded, internally panicking for a second as he remembered the pasta, but checking to find it was still okay and needed a few more minutes. That's the point, dumbass, Koyo responded. After a moment, Chuya was yanked backwards and pulled into a bone-crushing hug. This was horrifying. Please, don't do that again, Koyo whispered into Chuya's hair. Chuya felt himself getting choked up, and he just nodded, hugging back just as tightly and trying not to cry. I won't, I promise, he whispered, and he meant it. Under the lamplight, surrounded by textbooks, Dazai grimaced as he peeled his trousers away from his thighs, the fresh wounds from mere hours before sticking to his clothes. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair as he started unseeingly at another article about cancer and complications. It was the last thing he wanted to be reading. But he had jobs to do, and he didn't want to disappoint his father in another way. Maybe if he was better than good for his age, Mori would genuinely be proud of him. So he rubbed his eyes and started adding to his notes. Cancer as it metastasizes. Chapter 15. On Monday morning, Chuya's body felt like lead as he pulled himself out of bed, dragging himself through his usual routine, dressing and brushing his teeth, packing his lunch, doing so silently and slowly. He had barely blinked as he left the house and Dazai wasn't there, just walking to school, something in his gut telling him not to bother waiting. His brain was on autopilot as he ghosted through his classes, looking out for Dazai with every class he walked into. Immense disappointment filling him every time he couldn't find the familiar mess of brown hair in the corner of each room. By the time he was walking out to lunch, he was even more miserable than he had been before. The single cut hidden under the plaster on his arm was surprisingly painful, making him question how his soulmate could stand being alive with that constant pain everywhere. Next to him, Tachihara was rambling about a video game he had been playing, having noticed Dazai's absence and deciding to take his place. And then, you're supposed to shoot all the guys appearing on screen, while also trying to stand on different plates to kill the bad guy. The biggest problem is getting everyone else to do what they're told. I swear, half the guys I play with are useless. Chuya hummed absent-mindedly, walking with his hands in his pockets, not really listening. The entire thing isn't even that hard. It's just trying to find competent teammates. Tachihara continued, getting rather heated over the whole thing. Chuya just looked up at the sky, at the white clouds drifting across it, peering at the gray ones on the horizon, foreshadowing rain. Honestly, if he was in a better mood, he'd be asking questions, and probably figuring out whether it would be worth scrounging his pocket money to save for the game himself, especially with Dazai's birthday coming up. He was good with saving his money, but he was still trying to figure out how to one-up Dazai after the gifts he got for his birthday. That fountain pen now had a dedicated place on his desk. He sighed and Tachihara elbowed him. "Hello, Earth to Chuya? Are you even listening?" Tachihara asked accusingly, looking more concerned than annoyed. "You've been blanking out all day, dude. Moping over your boyfriend not being here?" Chuya shrugged, kicking a rock as he walked. "I mean, Dazai was supposed to be back today. He said he'd be in school, and he's not been here all day, and now it's lunch, and he's..." Chuya halted, stopping to stare at Tachihara. "Boyfriend?" Tachihara laughed as Chuya's face went red, absolutely mortified. "Oh my god, and you knew exactly who I was talking about too." Tachihara said with a wide grin, and Chuya's eyes widened. Fuck you! I didn't hear you properly! He shouted, and Tachihara jumped backwards, still grinning like an idiot. Dazai's your boyfriend, isn't he? Are you in love? Tachihara teased, and Chuya threw his arms in the air. I'm not! I hate that bastard with my entire soul! I'll fucking kill you if you ever say that again! Chuya screamed at the retreating Tachihara. You like Dazai, you like Dazai! Tachihara just taunted like the 5-year-old he might as well be. Chuya just scowled. He started walking after Tachihara, who yelped and started running, to which Chuya followed, the two running across the field while Tachihara screamed. Chuya actually found himself smiling as he chased after Tachihara, pausing to grab a fistful of the recently cut grass, grabbing Tachihara's arm when he caught up to him, and reaching up to dump it on top of his head. Ew, Chuya, what the fuck? Tachihara complained, making a futile attempt at brushing off the grass. You even had to reach up to get that on my head. Did you even notice that? He asked after a moment, a cocky smile back on his face. Chuya paused and glared at Tachihara before quickly bending over to grab another handful. Instantly, Tachihara started sprinting the rest of the way to the area lunch was normally held at, and as soon as he got there, he ducked behind Gin, who just looked at him weirdly as he used them as a full-body shield. That's it, coward! Hide behind your partner! Chuya yelled, not dropping the grass as he slowed the rest of the way, smiling pointedly at Gin. Hey Gin, do you mind if I get past you? Your boyfriend needs a good punch, and I have an awfully thoughtful gift for him. He said, nodding at the fistfuls of grass he had full intention of shoving down the back of Tachihara's shirt. Gin just shrugged and stepped aside, to which Tachihara instantly started pleading with them. No, Gin, please save me! He's going to kill me! Tachihara begged, and Chuya stepped forward, reaching to throw the first handful of grass at him. Then suddenly, he heard a familiar laugh coming from his lunch spot. He whipped his head around, instantly distracted by the sound. Oh, thank God! Tachihara breathed in relief, and Chuya turned back to glare at him. Gin laughed silently and signed something to Tachihara, who smirked. Chuya, while he had been attempting to learn sign, was not very good at it, and looked at Tachihara with confusion. They said to tell you your boyfriend's here, Tachihara said smugly. Chuya felt himself go red again, and although he was prepared to turn around and go straight for his lunch spot, he took an extra moment to shove both fistfuls of grass in Tachihara's face. He just flipped his middle finger at Gin, and promptly turned to leave. Ginger twink, he heard from behind as he walked away. Ginger whore, he returned, looking back over his shoulder with a glare, which he found being returned as Tachihara tried to brush the grass off his clothes. Satisfied, Chuya quickly walked the rest of the way to the tree he sat at for lunch, finding Dazai sitting in his usual place, smiling and speaking with Rampo. You! Chuya instantly said, pointing at Dazai. What the fuck are you doing here, jackass? Dazai just looked back up from where he was sitting with exaggerated disgust. Before he could say anything though, Chuya, who hadn't stopped walking, practically threw himself in Dazai's arms, making himself comfortable leaning on Dazai like a pillow. Dazai had made a slight oof sound, and seemed surprised by the sudden onslaught of attention. Hello, it's nice to see you too, Dazai said sarcastically, but he hugged Chuya back, squeezing him tightly. Chuya huffed and he shifted, and punched Dazai's shoulder, swearing and then pulling away, glaring at him. Fuck you! You said you'd be back! You didn't respond to any of my messages! You weren't there in the morning, and this is the first time I've seen your disgusting face for days! He said accusingly, looking at Dazai's face closely, realizing as he did so that he was checking for injuries. Dazai seemed fine, aside from looking a little tired and pale, but that was normal. Mori took my phone away the moment we reached the hotel. He wanted me to be as focused as possible. I didn't get it back until about an hour ago, and my phone was dead when I was given it back. Dazai explained, pointing to his phone, which was on the grass next to Kinikita, being charged from a battery pack. He looked apologetic, and he shrugged. The drive home was incredibly boring without being able to listen to music. Dazai complained, his tone whiny. Chuya rolled his eyes, hitting Dazai's shoulder once more, and shifting to sit next to him, leaning against him with his arms crossed. "Quit whining, nobody cares," Chuya said, moving his bag and rummaging around in it for his lunchbox. He was relieved Dazai was here though, and honestly would have been content to listen to Dazai whine about whatever he wanted for a few hours. As he found his lunchbox, and when he unclipped it, he yawned, finding himself surprisingly tired all of a sudden. He hadn't slept well, especially not the previous night, tossing and turning all night long. Dazai elbowed him to get his attention, then twisted to take Chuya's face between his hands, looking at him closely. "How tired are you? Did you not sleep?" Dazai asked as Chuya felt his face warm up. "You look exhausted." He scowled and pushed Dazai's hands away and just pulled out his sandwich, shoving it in his mouth and shrugging. "I'm tired, but it's not a big deal. I just didn't sleep well," he said around a mouthful of food, wrinkling his nose as he thought back to the night before, the nausea that had made a home in his stomach since the incident before dinner, and the anxious restlessness that had been gnawing at him. Dazai sighed, thinking with furrowed eyebrows. "You're normally out like a light the second it hits 10 p.m., he said as he peered at the contents of Chuya's lunchbox, deciding none of it looked particularly worth stealing. Chuya scoffed and rolled his eyes, quickly polishing off the rest of the sandwich half he had picked out. "Don't say that like it's a bad thing. Normally I'd wake up at like 7 in the morning. I get 9 hours of sleep. That's healthy. I've just been more tired recently and happen to be restless at the same time." Dazai just hummed, crossing his arms and settling back against the tree, allowing for Chuya to completely rest his weight against Dazai's side. He was really tired, he thought as he eyed his lunch, not actually very hungry. It was comfortably warm, and Dazai was breathing steadily as he talked quietly with Rampo. Well, as he made vague noises of acknowledgement while Rampo talked about the boy he was positive was his soulmate, but apparently he wasn't very forthcoming with any information about it. Chuya might have been more interested, but his eyes were heavy, and he was quite content to just close them. He tried to stifle a yawn and failed, sighing in annoyance as he picked at the grass. Dazai shifted next to him, and Chuya saw his opportunity, closing his eyes fully and pretending to be asleep as he rested his head on Dazai's shoulder, effectively cuddling into him. Dazai's first reaction seemed to be to elbow him and push him off, but Chuya was careful in his pretense, and when he let himself fall forward slightly, Dazai was quick to move and make it easier for Chuya to lay against him. "Is he asleep?" Chuya heard Rampo ask, amusement in his tone. Dazai's response was non-verbal, so Chuya couldn't tell, but he assumed it was a nod. While he hadn't necessarily intended to actually fall asleep, he could feel the familiar tug at the edges of his consciousness, attempting to drag him into the murky depths of a dreamless sleep. He didn't resist, letting it wash over him, his breathing slowing as he finally fell asleep. "Is he asleep?" Rampo asked, and Dazai glanced at him from where he had awkwardly positioned himself in an attempt to prevent Chuya from falling. He shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips as he felt Chuya breathing next to him, slightly quick and shallow, but dragged out like he was pretending. He wouldn't complain though, and he certainly wouldn't point it out. Rampo rolled his eyes, miming gagging when Dazai managed to find a comfortable way to sit, Chuya's full weight resting on him. It didn't take long for Chuya's breathing to even out fully, and when Chuya moved to grab Dazai's sleeve in his sleep, mumbling something, Dazai smiled. "Now he's asleep," he whispered to Rampo, who looked up from his phone, eyes flicking between the sleeping Chuya and rosy-cheeked Dazai. "Could your crush be any less obvious?" Rampo asked dryly, causing Dazai to wave his hand dismissively. "Just because you're content just dating for the title doesn't mean you can shit on me for being friends and also infatuated with Chuya. If I want to pine hopelessly, I will," he said, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Chuya or having him stir and hear what he was saying. Rampo paused, thinking for a moment. His eyes flicked to Chuya's arms and the blue lines covering them. "You're trying awfully hard to hide it, knowing what you do," he said. To Rampo, the fact that Chuya returned Dazai's feelings was painfully obvious. It had been for a month or so by now, ever since Dazai had started to make fun of Chuya about the prospect of a soulmate, as what had been an obvious attempt to deflect from the way Dazai had clearly been dreading the day, he had believed it would be confirmed that he and Chuya weren't meant to be. Chuya had been extremely agitated over it, snapping at Dazai, changing his responses from other people teasing him to Dazai teasing him. The snappy responses, the defensiveness, it had all screamed unrecognized feelings and denial. For someone who didn't seem to experience romantic attraction, he sure could notice it on anyone else. Speaking of, Rampo glanced at Yosano and Kinikida, who had taken to sitting together during lunch recently. Maybe he needed to orchestrate a way to get Kinikida hurt? He was annoyingly durable, apparently. Just a little bruise somewhere. Maybe pushing him down a flight of stairs? Dazai cleared his throat, trying to pull Rampo's attention back on him, slightly disturbed by the thoughtful look that had taken over Rampo's face as he looked at their other friends sitting just out of earshot. "You know why I can't tell Chuya. He'd hate me, for one," Dazai said, and he got cut off by an annoyed tone from Rampo. "You know that isn't true. You two could make an attempt on each other's lives and still end up sitting together for lunch." Dazai coughed a little in surprise, casting a pointed glance at the fading lines up the insides of Chuya's arms. Rampo grimaced. "Poor choice of words," he said tightly. Dazai nodded and he cleared his throat, his cheeks slightly red and feeling distinctly uncomfortable. "Yeah, regardless, I'm gonna pretend I believe you. That way you give up on trying to get me to believe it. And, as we just reminded ourselves, there is another reason I can't tell Chuya," he said firmly. Rampo frowned. Then he just sighed and rubbed his face tiredly. "You're making me be serious. This drags. Why couldn't you be silly?" Rampo complained, not giving Dazai a chance to respond before speaking again, taking on a solemn tone. "You need to speak to someone. This is getting dangerous," Rampo said firmly, and Dazai cringed away, attempting to duck behind Chuya. "I won't tell. You know I won't. I don't work like that. It was already bad, and it was already dangerous, but you're not passively suicidal anymore, Dazai. You have made an attempt on your life. Listen to me. You have tried to kill yourself. That's different. On top of that, you haven't told me why, and for all I know, you still have what you used, because I know shitty pencil sharpener blades can't do whatever the fuck you did to your arms. You are suicidal. I'm not blind." Rampo took a deep breath while Dazai carefully removed Chuya's hand from his sleeve, intertwining it with his own instead. "I won't tell anyone what you did, but if it comes to it, I will tell Fukuzawa that I'm worried about you." Dazai just stayed quiet, playing with Chuya's hand, tracing patterns on the back, running his fingers over the faint blue lines of his veins. Rampo sighed. After a moment of hesitation, he got up, moving to sit on the other side of Dazai, pressing against his side and crossing his arms like he wasn't happy about it. Dazai blinked in surprise. It was well known Rampo wasn't big on physical touch except under very specific circumstances. "I know. I wouldn't..." Dazai hesitated, groaning internally. Everything in him was screaming at him that he should push Rampo away. It wasn't safe to be honest with him anymore. Their entire agreement was that Rampo would find out anyway, so it was either Rampo found out on his own and told, or was told by Dazai and kept it a secret. Still, he squashed that part of him down and took a deep breath. "I wouldn't hold a grudge against you for it," I understand it's serious in your eyes," Dazai said begrudgingly, sighing. Rampo did not look pleased with the insinuation that it wasn't actually a big deal, but relented, just relaxing slightly next to Dazai. "Just be careful," Rampo said after a moment. Dazai swallowed and nodded. He looked down at Chuya's sleeping form and at his peaceful expression. Chuya shifted in his sleep, his grip in Dazai's hand tightening slightly. Dazai felt the bile rise in his throat. If Chuya found out, he'd never get this again. Not in the same way. Dazai's house was gloomier than Chuya remembered. It was like an air of misery had settled over it, grey and dull, the same as every other house on the street. All the curtains seemed to be closed, no lights on and no plants, unlike some of the other houses. It likely wasn't helped by the clouds, which had gotten steadily darker throughout the day, but Chuya could swear it hadn't always been like this. At some point, it had been a happy place, clinically clean and unsettling at times, but he only had good memories here. Maybe he'd just grown up. He didn't miss the slight hesitance in Dazai's demeanor as he went to open the door, but he didn't get the chance to comment on it before Dazai swung the door open, walking in confidently. He followed Dazai inside, slightly confused by the sudden switch, and Dazai tossed his bag down on the floor, as if it didn't really matter where it landed. "Welcome back to the Hell House," Dazai said with a dramatic sigh, turning and grinning at Chuya. "Just wait here while I grab Elise. My room's a bomb site right now," Dazai said, pointing in the direction of the living room and then quickly going to the stairs, casting a single anxious glance at his bag on the floor before he disappeared. Chuya furrowed his eyebrows as a sense of unease settled in his stomach, goosebumps crawling up the back of his arms as he continuously stepped into the living room, looking around. Not much had changed. A new rug and TV, an untouched candle on a shelf. It looked like a display room in a furniture store. He was almost surprised to not see product names and price tags on everything. It didn't look like anyone actually lived here. The only evidence of life were two blankets lying next to the arm of the couch, a matching blue and pink with stars, like traditional baby blankets, but a little bigger. Surely Dazai's and Elisa's. Chuya smiled slightly, something warming his heart about the idea of Dazai and Elise sitting together and watching TV. It was a shockingly endearing image. Dazai was rather good with kids, which he wouldn't have ever expected. He could easily imagine Dazai as a father, or generally as a member of a family, maybe married to someone, maybe pretty with long hair, blue eyes, maybe. The thought of a domestic Dazai, one that he could be around all the time, was something he couldn't help but wish he could be a part of. He has longish hair, blue eyes too, but he has a soulmate and doesn't like Dazai. He's had to purposely remind himself of that fact too many times for his liking recently. He swallowed and turned away from the blankets, shaking the thought out of his head. Stuff like that wasn't suited for him, and Dazai wouldn't want him like that anyway. Maybe he was feminine enough that Dazai would look past the gender thing? Not that he wanted him to. Before he could take that thought further, his gaze drifted to an imperfection in the white walls, which were a consistent shade aside from a single mark near the door. He walked closer, squinting at the brownish stain, a red tint to it. It wasn't small either, like it had been a liquid. It was a splatter. He felt slightly nauseous, looking up at it, reaching out to touch it. As he did so, the door opened, and he practically jumped out of his skin, and Mori entered the house, in the process of running his hands through his hair as he spotted the bag on the floor of the hallway. His gaze landed on Chuya next, and Chuya straightened up instinctively, feeling nervous under Mori's assessing stare. "Chuya," Mori said as an observation, his eyes flitting back to the bag. "Dazai brought you here, I assume?" Chuya nodded and spoke, trying to explain quickly. Something told him he wasn't meant to be here. "We're taking Elise to meet Yoka since they're only a little bit different in age, so they'll probably get along nicely, and it looks like it'll rain any second, so Dazai just let me in," he said quickly, and Mori hummed. I'm sure he did." Chuya shifted uncomfortably, and Dazai came down barely a moment later, darting into the space in front of Chuya, almost protectively. "We're just leaving," Dazai said, darting forward to grab his bag, then returning to his spot in front of Chuya. Elise was stood in the hallway in a pretty blue frock, a matching jacket unzipped over it. Chuya just wanted to leave, uncomfortable with the sudden tension. His eyes darted from his view of the back of Dazai's head to the mark on the wall. It was just about the same height of the top of Dazai's head. If Dazai stood on his toes or was slightly raised somehow, it would be roughly the same height as the cut on the back of his head. Then Dazai's hand was in his and he was being dragged out of the house, Elise quickly behind, and Chuya looked back over his shoulder to see Mori standing in the doorway, watching them leave impassively. "What was that?" Chuya asked sharply the second they were out of view, and Dazai shook his head. "I'll explain later." He never did. Chuya only remembered the weird encounter as he was getting ready to shower that night. He cursed himself internally, turning to glance over himself in the mirror. As he did, he noticed a blue mark on his left shoulder, faint but definitely there. He frowned, looking at it closely. Where did that come from? Back at Mori's house, Dazai rubbed his shoulder with a sigh. Chuya needed to learn to punch a little lighter if he was upset. He'd mention it another day. I was fully ready to mark this video as over 18 or explicit for the heavily triggering parts in chapter 14. Might still happen if I get enough serious comments freaking out over the events that happened. Please use /SRS and tone indicators to let me know. Chuya meeting Mori for the first time in the fic was super tense to read. The way I was also begging for them to leave as soon as possible. Someone call the police on that man. If I sound tired, it's because I've been sick for a few days and my vocal cords are still not warmed up. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Don't forget to send kudos to the author through the link in the description. Also, if you'd like to request any fics, YouTube community tabs are now open for you to post, aside from Tumblr. And if you'd like to show more support, I'm available on Ko-fi, and Super Thanks is now available. Hope you have a great week. Till next time.